Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us here this afternoon, either in Edinburgh or online. I'm really honoured to have been invited to give the lectures for 2026. As many of you will know, I do two today, two tomorrow and two on Sunday, so I'm thinking of this as a bit of an art history boot camp for me as well as you. But it would be lovely it's lovely to see you now, and if you join us for other lectures, even better. I hope everybody can hear me. Great, people are nodding here. Hope you can hear me online. If I'm too fast, shout slow down. Or if you can't hear, shout can't hear. But I just want to get on with it. Each of my lectures has an enormous amount of material, which I'm hoping to get through with you all today. Right. Meet Andrew Robertson, an émigré Scottish artist in London, in a miniature self-portrait wearing a tartan jacket, painted in watercolour on ivory in 1802. That same year, he wrote an extended memorandum dated the 1st of April, addressed to his elder brother, Archibald, in New York. Part of it reads as follows, quote, I'm thinking of publishing portraits of Scottish characters of the reign of George III, who by learning, courage, piety, etc., have done honour to their country. The Scotch were never so national as now. This is the result of reflection. I should have many subscriptions in London, my connections here wider and wider. I mean to publish portraits of the officers who were in the field of the 20th of March, accompanied by a history of the regiment, and that's the 42nd Regiment. Now is the time, he writes, when the nation is in a fever of admiration, and I wait for the patronage of the Highland societies of Scotland and England, close quotes. Robertson's projected portraits of his Scottish countrymen by educational, military and ecclesiastical professions never came to fruition. Neither did his history of the 42nd Regiment, an account of which was finally published some 20 years later by Colonel David Stewart as a prominent part of his sketches of the characters, manners and present state of the Highlanders of Scotland, with details of the military service of the Highland Regiments. Some of you may be familiar with this book. You can see there I'm showing you the title page, but also the map on the left, which folds out like that. For our purposes, what is significant is that these nascent cultural projects, which Robertson characterises as the result of reflection in the spring of 1802, were intended to capitalise on, and on their projected publication, to contribute what he identifies as an unprecedented national appreciation for his countrymen, the Scots. And via the details of Robertson's memorandum, we can trace the so-called fever of admiration back to March 1801 and the Battle of Alexandria, fought in Egypt during the revolutionary wars between Britain and France. This first major land victory of the era established the British Army in Egypt and, quote, rendered them masters of almost the whole peninsula. That's William Tytler's narrative of the expedition to Egypt under Sir Ralph Abercromby in the year 1801. Abercromby was the Scottish-born commander-in-chief of the British Army at the Battle of Alexandria. And this battle was incredibly important because it followed a series of ignominious defeats and underachievements by the British land forces. During the course of the battle, Abercromby was mortally wounded and died a week later. This first lecture investigates the cultural afterlife of the British military victory in Egypt in its representation in visual and material culture by Scottish, English and foreign artists in the metropolis in the early 1800s. So this lecture, we're very much going to be in London. And our artists are going to include Andrew Robertson, who I mentioned at the top. The various visual modes and modalities co-opted for representing the battle will be seen to embrace oil on canvas paintings displayed at London venues like the annual Royal Academy and British Institution exhibitions. I'm quickly going back here to the miniature self-portrait of Andrew, because I don't know if you'll be able to see, but there is a small label that says that this miniature was exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1802 and at the British Institution in 1808. And both of these exhibition venues are going to feature in my discussion. We're going to see, yes, oil on canvas paintings displayed at London venues like the annual Royal Academy. Sorry. These paintings were reproduced and circulated as engravings, often with explanatory numerical keys. The rubric material culture encompasses a range of objects, from commemorative medals commissioned by the Highland Society of London to a transfer printed ceramic mug, the latter of which introduces song culture in relation to its visual and material equivalents. The lecture seeks to understand how the reported fever of admiration for Robertson's countrymen, the Scots, was reified through representation, and as a vital component of this, how the said-to-be unprecedented characterisation of them as national was manifest in visual and material culture. In addition to Abercromby's heroic sacrifice for king and country, as it was characterised, the 42nd Regiment played a decisive, if later contested, part in defeating the formerly invincible French enemy. And what I'm trying to do in this lecture is to argue against the work of the sociologist Anthony D. Smith, who suggests that the conception of the nation was a high-level abstraction, remote from most people's experiences and concerns. What I wanted to show is that actually a balmy sense of Britishness was experienced in the wake of the 1801 victory across a wide social strata. As George Baldwin, the former Consul General of Egypt and advisor to Abercrombie, put it in his 1802 narrative, quote, "The rude and arduous scene of war, where stones are softened by our sense of glory into pillows of down." It's a lovely image there of there's something pillow-like in victory. This sense of glory or national celebration will be shown to permeate the design, production, reception and viewing of examples of visual and material culture in commercial and corporate commissions, depicting the death of the Scottish-born Commander-in-Chief and the achievements of the 42nd Regiment in the years immediately following the victory. Jacques-Philippe de Loutebourg was a London-based artist and contemporary of Andrew Robertson, who was responsible for pictorially representing aspects of the Egyptian campaign in the months immediately following the victory. The image he produced of the landing of the British troops at Abu Qir, which took place on the 8th of March, 1801, was one of a pair of oil on canvas paintings, the other being the Battle of Alexandria, which took place on the 21st of March, 1801. The Alsatian-born de Loutebourg was an artistic veteran by the turn of the century, having produced a succession of oil on canvas paintings of naval battles and military operations during the French Revolutionary Wars, from the Grand Attack on Valenciennes of 1794, and including the Battle of Camperdown and the Battle of the Nile. And all these military scenes and subjects were engraved for commercial reproduction and dissemination as prints, catering to the then patriotic fervour of their martial subject matter. These two canvases were actually commissioned from the artist by an engraver, Antoine Cardon, so he commissions them specifically to have them engraved, to make money from the proceeds of the sale. And compared to the Grand Attack on Valenciennes, which was a vast canvas of 6 by 8 feet, these are really quite modest size canvases. But one of the things I hope you can see is that they are absolutely crammed with figures in the foreground, the middle ground, and then moving into the background. They represent British supremacy against the French enemy in an assault landing in the shallow waters off the coast of Abu Qir, and then the victorious land battle that took place almost 2 weeks later, at which Abercromby was mortally wounded. De Lutterborg is an artist you may not have heard of. He's much more prominent now in 18th century studies as a stage designer than as an artist. When he came to London from Paris, he worked for David Garrick and later for Richard Sheridan. His canvas, The Battle of the Nile, and its compositional twin, Coalbrookdale by Night. These are the furnaces in Shropshire. This is an industrial landscape which was producing the various products that were servicing the ongoing wars. So both these canvases have been described as displays of British firepower, characterisations that are worth extending onto the landing at Abu Qir and its pendant, the Battle of Alexandria. I just show you, these are the coloured engravings after them. A key of reference, a leaf of printed ephemera indebted to military map-making precedents, was published at the same time as the engravings were produced. These keys acted as a propedeutic. This is a kind of visual instruction in making representations of military manoeuvres more intelligible to a civilian audience. The numerical key with its 23 identifiable parts, and I hope it's quite difficult to see in the room, I hope you can see it a bit better online, that it does have these 1 to 23 identifiable parts, which are taking you through the composition and identifying key figures, key landmarks, and the vessels that are involved in this. The French infantry is shown emerging in a break from what the accompanying text described as, quote, the incessant discharge of grape and canister, close quotes. Picturing the events of the Battle of Alexandria that took place 2 weeks later and 12 miles from Abu Qir along the narrow peninsula, de Lutterborg treated the canvas in 2 horizontal and vertical halves, showing on the right-hand side the wounded commander, Ralph Abercromby, surrounded by his staff, and on the left, the ongoing confrontation between French and British troops. And wonderfully, I have a pointer. Let me just come here. So what I'm suggesting is that we're looking at this canvas that's sort of split here in the middle and then across here. Here is Sir Ralph Abercromby, who is wounded. And I want to draw your attention to this figure almost in the centre. This is a soldier of the 42nd Regiment who links the 2 halves, I would suggest, as news of the incipient British victory is brought to Abercromby. The figure next to the Highland soldier, so I'm talking about this figure, is one Anthony Lutz, a private soldier of the 92nd Regiment who captured the French standard. He is presenting to the injured commander. As late as 1840, the walls of the Royal Academy in London were described in a review of its annual exhibition as a reflex of the time, like a barometer. It is the public mind that creates the pictures and statues, much more than the artists either of the chisel or the easel. When de Lutterborg's pair of canvases were exhibited at the Royal Academy in 1805, they were lauded in the St James's Chronicle as, quote, the pride of the present exhibition. Their subject matter was described as being highly interesting to the feelings of every true Briton, and so well described by the artist in this imitable picture that no words can do justice to its merits, close quote. The Royal Academy was a metropolitan exhibition venue on the Strand, where the entrance fee to the annual exhibition was £1. 9 years later, the pair was exhibited again at the British Institution, a gallery on Pall Mall run by a group of wealthy patrons, which has been described as a supplement to the Royal Academy, and more recently as part of an ecosystem of exhibitions in early 19th century London. And when the pair of canvases were exhibited at the British Institution in 1804, an unidentified English newspaper referred to them as follows, quote, it is pleasing to dwell on those subjects which contribute to preserve the military fame of one's country. it is also a debt due to the heroic chieftains whose victories have been sealed with their blood, close quotes. Note the patrimonial language of the Scottish Highlands used to refer obliquely to Abercromby, who was from a landed Whig family in Clackmannanshire and who combined a military career with a political one, serving twice as a member of Parliament for the county. A faithful journal of the late expedition to Egypt lauded Abercromby's exemplary service to his country as both warrior and legislator. Warrior is a term that's going to come up again and again in my lectures, and I'm going to think a little bit about it. The year after they were exhibited at the Royal Academy, so we're in 1806 now, Cardon published engravings of the landing at Aboukir and the Battle of Alexandria for a second time. And so by the time of this second issue, they're no longer what we art historians call pendant or a pair of landscapes. The two canvases have now become the engraved wings of what was an imperial triptych, an altarpiece to Britain's expanding empire, with a third image as a centrepiece after an 1804 pen and wash drawing by de Luterborg. This is probably one of the key images that I'm sharing with you today, and very little has been written about this. So yeah, as I said, I found myself coming back to this image again and again. This is a colour stippled engraving, which is entitled Sailors, Soldiers and Mariners Decorating an Egyptian Monument, with portraits of the officers on the staff at the Battle of Alexandria. And there is an accompanying dedication to His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, at the foot, which is very difficult to see and much faded. In this image, as the title reveals, representatives of the British Army, Navy and merchant seamen embellish a victory monument to the British Army officers following the battle at Alexandria, a collective endeavour in honour of their martial leaders against the formerly invincible French. Quote, "They conquered the spirit of an exalted and dangerous enemy. They have diffused a spirit of emulation among our own. They have honoured us," extolled George Baldwin in his narrative of the ever-memorable British campaign, adding, "The sailors triumphed in the glory of the army. They rejoiced with them. The brave delighted in the brave," close quotes. In the image by de Luterborg, I invite you to think about how the brave continue to delight in the brave, as using a fairly hackneyed visual metaphor, stormy battle skies of dark, puffy clouds make way for the penetrating rays of a new dawn at sunrise. A surviving pyramidal structure from ancient Egypt is repurposed as a victory monument come portrait gallery of Britain's martial heroes in the 1801 campaign. Its surface is covered and its hieroglyphics obscured by 14 oval-shaped portraits containing the head and shoulder likenesses of generals, as the territorial landscape of once ancient empires on which it stands is conquered by turn-of-the-century Britain. Quote, "We were now upon scripture ground." This is a private soldier from the 92nd Regiment, another Highland Regiment. "We had come from a distant island of the sea to the country of the proud pharaohs to carry on war where Nebuchadnezzar and Alexander the Great, Caesar and other great warriors had put armies in motion." Close quote. What was scripture ground for the rank-and-file soldier was classic ground for his superiors like Captain Hall, whose, quote, "first view of the pyramids was striking and produced a sensation of awe on the mind. The sight of the colossal monuments placed on considerable heights and whose antiquity was unknown 3,000 years ago when Herodotus visited them." Herodotus there, a reference to his classical education. Ancient markers like the pyramids served as a locus for musings on the material survival of architectural markers versus the transience of the once illustrious empires who had erected them, a quintessential trope of the so-called Romantic period, when Britain and France battled to inherit the mantle of ancient Rome and her once great empire. Following the Battle of Alexandria, Britain's territorial empire was poised to grow. The victories that led to the expulsion of the enemy from Egypt removed the French threat to British expansion in India, with Egypt positioned as the accessible gateway to the East Indies. So what's really important about Egypt is that it becomes a kind of gateway for the British to get to India, and that kind of safe passage, and they want to be protected to get there. So that's one thing that's really important about the battle. The other really important thing is that they have this victory which restored the honour of British arms over the previously invincible French after defeats in Flanders in 1794 and Holland in 1799. De Lutterborg's incorporation of medallion portraits of army officers in his representation of the major land victory of the period draws on a well-established martial iconographic precedent. And here I'm going to share with you thinking about some of the kind of visual language which this draws on, and this is the sort of bread and butter to the art historian. So let's do some of this good art historical work. So I'm looking at that wonderful image by de Lutterborg, which, as I say, is not well known, not written very much about. So I'm trying to make sense of it. So I'm looking at similar compositional themes that came previously. And this is an engraving after Francis Hayman's vast 1762 painting of the Triumph of Britannia. And this was formerly in the vestibule of the Rotunda in the Pleasure Gardens at Vauxhall, London. And many of you will have heard of pleasure gardens. This is a fee-paying experience where you sort of go to see and be seen, and often you would have there would be lots of unusual buildings which would be richly decorated with paintings, and there would also be sculptures. So it was quite an exhibition space for contemporary art. Anyway, we're looking here at the engraving by Simon-François Ravenet of 1765. And I want to just think about this. So what we're looking at here is a classicizing allegory of British naval victories against the French during the 7 Years' War, in which a muscly Neptune drives a two-horse chariot with Britannia seated holding a medallion portrait of King George III. If I get my pointer. So here, let's get this right. If the woman can work the thing. So here is is that working? No. There is Britannia seated, and there she is holding this medallion portrait of George III. Accompanying the chariot on its aquatic journey, a group of naked buxom sea nymphs ride on fish, holding aloft 7 portraits of admirals: Pocock, Boscawen, Hawke, Anson, Saunders, Keppel and Howe. Mere men blow conches and a trumpet as they escort the victors across the waves and away from the ships most prominent in the right background. The portrait medallions, based on published mezzotints after recent oil on canvas portraits of the admirals, deliberately reference what is known as the imago clipiata, a shield-like image in an ancient Roman military monument shown hanging from a tree in memory of a dead warrior. And these imago clipiata became a staple fixture of 18th century monumental sculpture. And I'm just giving you one example from Westminster Abbey. This is the monument by Joseph Nollekens, known as the Three Captains Monument. What I'm trying to suggest then is that the image by de Lutterborg represents what we might think of as a paradigm shift in visual culture, in using martial medallion portraits to commemorate a major land rather than a sea victory. The image also dispenses with the allegorical classicizing idiom so long favoured for the patriotic representation of naval victories. And what you'll see is that actually what we have here are what look like miniature portraits, only here they're enlarged to the size of life. And we're told in the title we have sailors, soldiers and mariners who are shown erecting and hanging these life-size medallion-shaped portraits onto this monument. The viewer is able to identify the cast of supporting figures from the diagrammatic key that accompanied the 1806 engraving, with its corresponding head and shoulder outlines. With their distinctive oval shapes and focus on the sitter's head and shoulders, the medallions evoke miniature portraits, only here graphically enlarged to the size of life. The latter was a subgenre of portraiture much favoured by the peripatetic military, as seen in a palm size, it's about the size of my palm, oval portrait of Captain George Sutherland painted in watercolour on paper. This is a painting by an artist called Little John. We don't know his first name, and dated 1806. Our émigré Scottish artist in London, Andrew Robertson, painted a watercolour on ivory miniature of Lieutenant General Sir John Moore, signed AR and dated 1808, the year before his mortal wounding at the Battle of Corunna, which is the focus of the next lecture. And the final lecture in my boot camp weekend, we'll be looking at the miniature portrait in much more detail, just to show you for your own, for the information that you can, I'm struggling with this laser pointer, that it says the initials there, AR, and the date are just painted there. Right. So I want to look, this is the explanatory key which was produced, which again, much like the one we've already looked at, identifies the key figures in this image. And the one that I want to just want to focus on briefly is number 6, who is identified as a Mameluke admiring the attachment of British soldiers to their chiefs. The Mamluks were a caste of mounted warriors, gentlemen soldiers commanded by their own officers who rule the country as tyrants under the Turkish governor, explained Daniel Nicol, a private soldier with the 92nd Regiment. Their name signifies bought man in Arabic, and they supported the British in the advance on Cairo and contributed to the overall success of the campaign. And the Scottish soldiers and officers that I've been looking at are really quite fascinated by this race of mounted men, and they write quite extensively about them, and they sort of see them as quite a curiosity, in part because they are so impressed that the Britons are loyal to their senior officers. These freeborn Britons are loyal to their senior officers. As I say here, in the image by de Luterborg, the Mamluk acts as a visual cipher, emphasising the loyalty of the freeborn Britons in the army, navy and artillery to their military officers. The pyramidal structure of the monument neatly echoes the hierarchical ranks of the British Army, with de Luterborg's image rigidly conforming to the boundaries of class, ethnicity and gender in its portraits of the officer cadre. Representatives of the supporting cast of soldiers, sailors and mariners are drawn from a wider class base, a more diverse ethnic community. Let me see if I can get an image to you. So yes, so you see here, so the Mamluk is on the far side on horseback, and then also on this side we have, of course, a sepoy, and then next to him we have a Highland officer. And I want to suggest that what we're looking at here is a more diverse ethnic community that make up the family of Britain as a nation, whose imperial territories were expanding exponentially due to the martial contribution of those in the image. And yeah, so just what else would we want to say about this image? It gives us sort of battle spolia in the forms of cannons and swords that you can see in what we are historians call the foreground. Distant views on the left-hand side of the Pharos of Alexandria and Pompey's Pillar puncture what military engineer Charles Pasley termed, quote, the boundless horizon of barrenness that was the Alexandrian coastline. And they also confirm the geographical location as being Egypt. So even if you were looking at this image and it made no sense to you, one would hope that you might see a pillar and you might think, Pompey's Pillar. Quote, no tree nor bush nor any herbage grows here, recorded Sergeant Lickle. Sand, nothing but sand and sunshine. I really enjoyed that quote, sand and sunshine. These unpublished letters that I'm sharing with you today are from the Scottish officers And their accounts are as much travel logs off the battlefield as campaign narratives on it, in a wartime period when travel and soldiering were said to be synonymous. Lachlan Macquarie was a deputy adjutant general, spent an hour visiting Pompey's Pillar on the 5th of September 1801. So it's important to remember that, yes, they're there, but they also go on these kind of touristic expeditions. He goes and spends an afternoon with Pompey's Pillar, and he writes about it extensively. Another soldier that I'm looking at is the military engineer Charles Passley, who goes to see Pompey's Pillar. Before embarking on his excursion to Egypt, Passley's brother John imagined it as an exercise in military thanatourism, a touristic phenomenon which will be explored in Lecture 3, devoted to Waterloo. So when I come on to Waterloo tomorrow, I'm going to be thinking about this idea of thanatourism and what it means. And Passley, we know, as many other soldiers did, while he's in Egypt, he takes time to go and visit the monuments from antiquity that are so esteemed, and he also measures them and records information about them in a journal. Passley's journal, unfortunately, hasn't survived, but we do have a publication by another military officer, Captain Thomas Walsh, who produced this extraordinary publication, Journal of the Late Campaign in Egypt, including descriptions of that country and of Gibraltar, Minorca, Malta, Marmaris, and Macri. What's distinctive about Walsh's text is that it's also illustrated. So it has a large number of accompanying images that he produced. And a lot of these military officers will be trained in not necessarily very sophisticated levels of draftsmanship, but certainly some basic draftsmanship. And you can see here, it has this magnificent map. And just to give you, right, so here's an image that shows you Pompey's Pillar. Right. One of the things that Walsh says in his book, quote, "The construction of these massive monuments, built with all the proportions necessary to ensure their durability, though not a masterpiece of elegance, is surely one of art, as neither the force of winds and storms, the gradual decay of time, nor the spoiling hand of man has been able to shake them. If man's spoiling hand could not topple these massive monuments, he could always carve his name on their surface, as Daniel Nicol did in the southeast corner of the Great Pyramid. So he has a graffiti of his name. Or, again, because they couldn't shake them, these military officers would chip away at them in providing souvenirs for female family members from whom serving officers were separated while on campaign. George Al-Husi sent his sister Lucy some unspecified Egyptian curiosities in 1801, while Charles Passley gifted his cousin Wilhelmina Malcolm 2 pieces of stone from the pyramids and a granite fragment that purported to be from Cleopatra's Needle 4 years later. Quote, "Though ugly in themselves," he wrote to her, "they may from their venerable titles find a place in your grotto." He's referring there to the imperial objects that she was accumulating in her rural cottage at Burnfoot in the Scottish borders, which have been written about as a means for women to participate in the manly pursuit of empire through the collecting and display of objects acquired by their serving male kin. And here I'm showing you a couple of images. So you see the exterior of the cottage there, and then a black and white photograph from around 1900. Some of these curiosities, these Egyptian curiosities, have made their way into the National Museum Scotland, but there's certainly nothing which is sort of first class. In the metropolis, for the entrance fee of a shilling, women could view pictorial battlescapes like those displayed at the Royal Academy or the British Institution annual exhibitions. They might acquire prints after them. They might also deploy their clothed bodies as exhibition spaces by wearing fashionable military accessories. Jessie Allen sent her sister Agnes, who was in India with her military surgeon husband, a few yards of the 42nd plaid ribbon, which is quite the go here at present. She's in Edinburgh. So this is in Edinburgh in September 1802, some 18 months after the victory at Alexandria. When Abercrombie's Quartermaster General, George Murray, penned penned a letter to his sister Augusta from a camp near Alexandria in March 1801. He omitted a detailed account of the recent operation on the grounds, quote, "it would be of little interest to you," close quotes. A decade later, when he was in Portugal on campaign, he insisted, you would not understand them battles, nor think them pretty, were I to write you a whole volume, close quotes. And actually, I particularly enjoyed this correspondence because the woman that he's writing to, so not only is her brother a high-ranking military officer, but she goes on to marry a high-ranking military officer. So his sort of casual misogyny, wouldn't be interested in war, really made me laugh. We know that women were enthusiastic readers of martial literature during the open decades of the 19th century. Military engineer Charles Passley was famously the first soldier Jane Austen ever sighed for, as she wrote after reading his essay on the military policy and institutions of the British Empire, first published in 1810. Educated women in the upper and middle echelons of British society consumed and displayed a mediated vision of warfare as recipients of objects for their collections, viewers of paintings exhibited in the metropolis, and readers of its literature. Like Lucy Dalhousie, Wilhelmina Malcolm, and Augusta Campbell, they were also the family members of serving officers, notably the sisters of their bachelor brothers. In 1809, and it's 1809 that my next lecture is focused on, roughly 1 in every 10 men of military age, which is 18 to 45 years, was serving in the regular forces of the British Army, the Navy, or the embodied militia. Adding the volunteer and local militia in a period of mass mobilisation, the proportion rises to an extraordinary 1 in 6. And what I want to try and convey through all my lectures is that war in the period of the Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars is a family affair, with Britain as a nation with an emerging empire as the family writ large. And this image of family is going to be one that carries throughout the whole block. So what I've tried to do so far is to introduce you to some of the pictorial outputs in response to the campaign. We've looked at paintings of the landing at Aboukir, the Battle of Alexandria, and how they were reproduced in print culture and also reproduced with these explanatory keys so that you can navigate your way through the image. And as I have indicated, a lot of these military productions at the turn of the century were commercial. So they are all intended to capitalise on this martial fervour and this moment of martial fervour. So what I want to do now is I want to move from paintings and I want to think briefly about sculpture. And I want to move from the kind of commercial marketplace into a corporate commission. And here we are thinking about the Highland Society of London. The Society was a voluntary association founded in May 1778. Its Scottish equivalent followed 6 years later. And you may remember that Andrew Robertson is waiting for patronage from these societies when he wrote to his brother of the nation being in a fever of admiration for Scots. And as I said, I want to think now about a sculptural commission. I want to think about a medal produced by Andrew Robertson. So Robertson was himself a Highlander by descent, and he produced a design for the Society's medal to Alexandria and Abercromby, which, according to their brief, needed to depict the capture of the French imperial standard by Major Stirling of the 42nd Regiment. Robertson submitted his design in April 1802, along with rival submissions from those the minutes of the Society designate as artists of celebrity, when they really weren't, actually. They were just sort of jobbing artists. The Society were demanding patrons. They had already rejected drawings by the medal engraver Nathaniel Marchant after a design by the history painter Henry Singleton. By June 1805, a group of 11 drawings, including 4 by Robertson, 4 by James Robert Grant, and 1 by Singleton, were sent to the Birmingham manufacturer Michael Bolton for his opinion as to which would be best adapted to a medal design in silver, the size of a dollar coin, to be minted in a series of 1,000. Just to show you some of these images. Thanks so much to Callum Robertson for these images. And we do have these sketches, and they're now distributed between 2 sites. So they have some of them at the Black Watch Museum, and then there are some others in the National Museum Scotland at the War Museum at the Castle. 3 months later, President of the Royal Academy, Benjamin West, wrote to Robertson that he had produced a design voluntarily in which the Celtic hero is shown obtaining the French imperial standard at the memorable battle in Egypt, a subject he thought interesting to the United Kingdom and is a military honour. Though signed and dated 1805, West's design has never appeared in previous studies of the Anglo-American artist, including a catalogue raisonné of 1986. So actually this is a really important image in the Black Watch Museum in Perth. And you'll notice that it represents the 2 principal protagonists in a partial X-shape encounter in which the colossal Highland soldier in full dress uniform attempts to seize the invincible standard from a mustachioed French officer behind him. The captured standard was carried to London by George Baldwin, the former Consul General of Egypt, who described it in his political recollections as the palm of numerous victories gained by the Legion, and which are inscribed thereon to their immortal honour. Ever an honourable trophy it will be to England, since it is the achievement of greater achievement, as it was won from the bravest warriors of the time. In West design, the opponent recoils from the Highland soldier's upraised sword as a crocodile snaps at the fabric of the lowered standard. The cavalryman's hat with its large feathers lies on the ground with his fallen sword. Pompey's pillar is shown in the right distance. And again, I think that these are easily identifiable monuments. In the medal as cast, here it is, the crossed figures are encircled by an inscription in Gaelic to the heroes who gained the victory in Egypt, with the date 21st of March 1801, and on the reverse is a bust portrait of Abercromby in profile, shown with an inscription in Latin or Latinized, and the date of his death. The 42nd Regiment subsequently declined the medal commissioned by the Highland Society of London in their honour. And I don't have time to get into this furore today, thankfully. Certainly, their authorised history claims that it was only the king that could offer this kind of medallic tribute. And actually, there is this sort of war imprint about which standard was captured and by whom, but we're not going to get into that today. What I do want to move on to is graphic satire. So the capture of the invincible standard at the Battle of Alexandria by the 42nd Regiment was forever associated with mastery over Napoleon in graphic satire, in an image captioned at the foot, an old performer playing on a new instrument, or one of the 42nd touching the invincible. In the image, which was published by Samuel Forres on 22nd of September 1803, a massive-looking Highland piper wearing the uniform of the 42nd Regiment stands in profile, playing the contorted figure of the diminutive Napoleon like a bagpipe. His right arm twisted behind his back is the chanter, his knee-length boots the drones, perched on the piper's left shoulder. So he's sort of thrown the boots over his shoulder. God Save Great George Our King is the patriotic tune emanating out of the squeezed torso of this novel musical instrument. Colloquially known to the British as Boney, his tiny contorted body becomes the vessel for producing the rousing tune of the British national anthem, while the reference to one of the 42nd touching the invincible through sustained blowing and playing of the pipes carries homoerotic connotations, both oral and genital. What I was able to do was to think about the idea of the Highland piper. And certainly what I found quite striking is that it wasn't until 1854 that an establishment was formally created for 5 pipes and a pipe major in the Highland Regiments to be borne at their expense. So for some reason I had assumed that this would have happened much earlier. Accounts concerning the bravery of pipers in battle and the instantaneous effect of the sound of their plangent national music inciting war-weary troops to victory proliferated. I'm going to give you one example from our time frame, which is George Clark, who rouses the Highland troops to victory at the Battle of Vimeru. In another memoir, William Clark, who was a sergeant with the Scots Greys and was himself Scottish, found it, quote, remarkable that the sound of this warlike instrument produces so extraordinary an effect on Scots in action. And it was the Scots who responded to the drone in droves. In Thomas Bunbury's reminiscences of a veteran, quote, the ear of the Scot finds something to approve in the drone of the Highland pipe, while his southern neighbour finds it a discord of the most outrageous character. Abercrombie's quartermaster general John Murray, this is Murray who refused to tell his sister about the battles. He's writing again to his sister, he's severely chastising her. He's now in Spain during the Peninsular War for her, quote, unguarded confession that the bagpipes give you a headache, on the grounds that such sentiment was not fitting for a Highland lady. When it came to the hoarse murmurs of the bagpipes, even women could not break the tight ranks of the Caledonian phalanx. Hence the very idea of Napoleon being sexually violated as a musical instrument to rouse the Scots to defeat his own troops was an imaged act that saw his masculinity subverted by the enemy in an art of graphic humiliation. When an old performer playing on a new instrument engraving published by Forres in 1803 was transfer printed onto a bone china mug manufactured by Spode, the snow-capped mountain peaks of the Scottish Highlands became more like sand dunes, and the first line of the national anthem was followed with a ditty. Quote, he fell in love with Egypt once because it was the high road, to India for himself and friends to travel by a nigh road. And after making mighty fuss and fighting day and night there, 'twas monstrous ungenteel of us who would not let him stay there. These 4 lines derive from an anonymous song entitled Bonaparte and published circa 1803 in an obscure pamphlet publication. And yes, you guessed it, we're going to hear this song.
Come listen, every lord and lady, gentleman and statesman, I've got a little song to sing about a very great man, and should the name of Bonaparte mingle in my story, 'tis with all due submission to his honour's worship's glory. Bow wow wow, fa-lal-dee-dee-dee, bow wow wow. The kindness of this philanthropic gentleman extending, Colossus-like from isle to isle, their grievances amending, to England would reach if he could from fancied ills to save ye. But though he likes us vastly well, he does not like our navy. Bow wow wow, fa-lal-dee-dee-dee, bow wow wow. With Egypt once he fell in love, because it was the high road to India for himself and friend to travel by a nigh road. And after such a mighty fuss and working night and day there, 'twas monstrous ungenteel of us that would not let him stay there. Bow wow wow.
We've got another audio for you as well. So I've given you 3 verses of a 13-verse song. It goes on. I'm cutting it there for very good reason. It's a song, as you would have gathered, that's called Bow Wow Wow. A tune which was originally composed in the early 1780s for a satirical song on William Pitt the Younger and Henry Dundas, which remained a fixture of street repertoire and was endlessly reprinted long until the end of the 19th century. Bonaparte is one of 400 examples listed by Oscar Cox Jensen in his 2015 study of Napoleon and British song. And those of you who are interested in this, I would refer you to Cox Jensen's really outstanding work. And one of the things that he has shown us is that songs were demonstrably a form of popular culture, being written, printed, performed, and heard. And he talks about how they live in performance. They live in the mouth, in the eye, and the ear, not simply on the page. And I've got another, I was going to show you this other audio, I'm conscious of the time, but this is an example of another intersection between soundscapes and visual culture, which is Charles Diblin's A Voyage to Margate. And this is, let me see if this is going to work.
Standing one summer's day on the tower slip, careless how I my time should employ, it popped in my head that I'd take a trip aboard of a Margate boy. I took a few slops such as shirts and a coat, for the prog I knew where they'd be stored. Then I hailed a pair of oars, shoved off my boat, and away I dashed aboard.
Before you all get up and start dancing. Right, so this is just to show you that, to think about the relationship between visual culture and song culture, because I want to go back, but without it starting up again, because what happened is that this song was then thought of in relation to this colour engraving, a scene on board a Margate hoy, as described by Dibdin, where we have this excursion that these Londoners go on to a seaside resort in Kent. And you'll notice here that one of them is the alderman Garbage is vomiting profusely. So this is talking about the sea voyage. And really, I'm putting this up so that we can think about the relationship between the visual and then the soundscape, which are lovely examples seen here, also includes the object. So we also have the mug. So we've got the engraving, we've got the song, but here we also have the mug. So I'm suggesting that we have this kind of triangle where one feeds on another, feeds back to another, and so on. Right. This is my summing up. Apologies that I've gone on. Right. The British Army's victory at the Battle of Alexandria in Egypt on 21st of March 1801 and the concomitant mortal wounding of its Scottish commander-in-chief was commemorated in visual and material culture across the sister arts of oil on canvas painting and in medallic sculpture, in ceramics and on paper by British and foreign artists. The majority of these exhibitions and objects are characterised in their commission, production, reproduction and exhibition as determinedly metropolitan endeavours, permeating their patriotic message across a wide stratum of urban society. When Andrew Robertson wrote in 1802 that the nation was in a fever of admiration for his countrymen, the Scots, for in the examples I've shown you here, we might say that that admiration was effectively mobilised among the elite, the middling, and with the addition of song culture, the working classes. In turn of the century metropolis, the Royal Academy was one of a number of exhibition spaces for contemporary British art. For the entrance fee of £1, audiences of men and women could view for a fixed term paintings of the 1801 campaign like those by de Luterborg. They could navigate the details of the canvases by first identifying and then identifying with the individual officers from the engraved numerical keys that accompanied their exhibition. When the Highland Society of London sought to commemorate the military achievements of the 42nd Regiment at Alexandria with a medallic tribute, the contested sequence of events meant that this corporate commission faltered. Only with the Bonaparte song is it possible to recreate the contours of the subaltern classes for whom music and song were a popular means of national mobilisation in the face of a French invasion threat. The Scots were never so national as now, and there I am quoting Robertson, in April 02, through the prolonged euphoria following a major British land victory in Egypt some 13 months earlier. Scots in the form of the Commander-in-Chief of the British Army and the contribution of the 42nd Highland Regiment were understood to have manifestly secured that victory. It was subsequently represented in a variety of wartime cultural productions centred in the metropolis, which allowed England to embrace, finally, an idea of martial Scotland as an active partner in the victorious triptych of a new British nation, a union of England, Scotland and Ireland. Britain was a nation at arms whose incipient empire was expanding in no small part due to the service and sacrifice of her Scottish sons. The next lecture focuses on another such son, Sir John Moore, who served with Abercromby in Egypt in 1801 and his mortal wounding at the Battle of Corunna in January 1809. This lecture is going to ask, was the portrait painter Thomas Lawrence correct when he surmised in private correspondence that it was, quote, fortunate for Moore's reputation that he fell in the field while commanding the British Army to victory? Thank you.